All right, friends, welcome back to the Blessed Family Podcast. As always, excited to be with you today. God is good. He is on his throne, and he is at work. He's building his church, and that involves always, the building up his church involves building up strong biblical families who are not at all anywhere close to perfect. We have tons of issues, but that's where God gets the glory because he's able to use us even in our weakness. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to be sanctified. We're trying by his grace to grow in our understanding of what it means to be his disciples and what it means to be families that are aligned with his word. And so this is where spouses turn their hearts to each other. Fathers turn their hearts to the children and the children to the fathers. People get serious about resurrecting the biblical principles of manhood, womanhood, parenthood, and things like that, of course the enemy is trying to thwart. But friends, God's plan ultimately is not going to be thwarted. We have the victory. We need to take hold of it and run with it. All right, well, today we're going to talk about one of my favorite documents, and that is the Declaration of Independence. After all, we just celebrated July 4th. In a couple years, we're going to be coming up on the 250th anniversary of this nation. And let me be very, very clear. On one side of the coin, this nation ultimately, eternally is nothing. This nation is going to end. God's kingdom is the only kingdom that is going to endure forever and ever without end. Amen. And yet on the other side of the coin, God has done something very special in this nation. So if you're wondering where I'm coming from in this, I'm one of those Christians who love America, and yet I don't worship America. But what I do appreciate and what I do endeavor to instill within my children is the history and theology that brings about liberty. America thus far has been the nation, in my opinion, with the most liberty, and we're gonna define what that means. In the history of the world, guess what? America might survive, it might not, but I believe that Christians are the conduits for future liberty. So if not here, somewhere, maybe in Africa, maybe in Asia. And so we want to instill within our children the principles of liberty. Let me give you a quick definition of what liberty is and liberty is not. Liberty is freedom to obey God. It is a society that is aligned with the Word of God. Freedom is not letting people do whatever they want to do. For example, if you had a nation or a state or a city where you could murder, well, in the womb, we have tons of those still. But if you had nations where you could murder, that's not freedom. Nations where you're allowed to satisfy or gratify your fleshly perversion, that's not freedom. That's actually enslaving people to their flesh. No, government is supposed to create a boundary of what is right and what is wrong, by God's grace to be a shield against the flesh of mankind. Okay, so let's talk about the Declaration of Independence. A little over 1,000 words long, penned mainly by Thomas Jefferson. We aren't going to go through the whole thing, but I am going to read the first section of it today, and I'm going to give you 5 points that agree with good biblical theology concerning government. By the way, I want to promo our book here, Christianity and Government, the Education That Brings Freedom. Would encourage you to get a copy of this. This is a very simple yet, I believe, powerful overview of the history and theology that led to the founding of this nation and will lead to other nations of liberty, of Christian liberty. And I'm very excited to also announce that we have an audiobook on the way. We found a gentleman who does an amazing job reading this book, and he is endeavoring to get that done, and it should be out in just a month or two. All right, so let's go through just the first few paragraphs of the Declaration of Independence. Now, statistically, many of you have never read this document. They say that less than 25% of Americans have read this document. It is theologically, philosophically fascinating, in my very strong opinion. Okay. In Congress. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through this and I'm going to bring out 5 points. Okay, 5 points that you can find that are built upon the philosophy and theology of the Bible. You can also find these points and many more in this book, Christianity and Government. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal stations to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Okay, here's where we get our first point. And let me just say, I'm just going to scratch the surface today. There's a lot I'm not going to talk about, but this is kind of a warm-up to how amazing this document is. Okay, first point is, our war for independence was just that. It was not a revolution or an overthrow of a government. It was not rebellion against, we were not breaking Romans 13. It was instead a dissolving or a separation of a political band. And that brings up the great point that governments are contractual. They are a covenant. We see this in the Old Testament, right? We see this with Solomon's son. I think it was Rehoboam or Jeroboam. I get him confused. I think it was Rehoboam. He, of course, every time I say that, I'm always wrong. It's always the other person. But he basically broke covenant with the people, and the people said, look, you have broken covenant with us. We are breaking covenant with you, and the kingdom was divided. So if a party breaks, whether it's the people or the government, if a party breaks the contract, there are consequences. Easy example is a criminal, right? So I am in covenant with my government not to murder. If I murder, well, now there's consequences, and I'm going to be held liable. Well, it goes the other way too. If the government breaks the law in a big way, then you have, for instance, the impeaching of a president. In essence, this was the impeachment of the King of England. And people looking at Romans 13 and saying, hey, Romans 13 defines a government as one who does good to the good guys and punishes the bad guys. But now, King George, you are punishing the good guys, not honoring your contract. You have become the bad guy. You have become a tyrant. You're punishing good guys and you're commending bad guys. You are no longer a lawful authority. You are no longer a Romans 13 government. So therefore, it is our duty to raise up a government who will guard our God-given liberties. So that's point one. This was not a rebellion. The Founding Fathers did not break or sin by breaking Romans 13. No, they recognize this person has broken the laws of God. This person has broken covenant. Therefore, they are no longer a legitimate lawful authority. All right, it goes on to say this, and here's the most famous line of the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. These are fascinating words. Second point that we see here are rights are given to people by God. Rights are determined by God, not governments. See, this is what we just read, is that we hold these truths to be self-evident. All people are created equal, and that they are given by God certain rights. And it goes on to say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted. We have to put the cart or the horse before the cart, right? God gives us rights, and he gives us governments to protect those rights. Today, we have it backwards. Of course, well, it's because of rebellion against God. Think about it. If I am a God hater, and I want to just satisfy, if I want my sinful, unlawful desires to be legal, then I'm going to get government, a wicked government, to define my rights as something different than the rights of God. For instance, God has not given us the right to satisfy our sinful flesh. Now, he has given us the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is, in essence, the way they were speaking back then, the pursuit of private property, ironically, which I don't even think, private property exists, but property taxes have kind of made that difficult to say that you truly own something, because you have to pay rent, and ever-increasing rent, to the government, else they take away your property. So we see the second point is rights are from God. That is, guys, without Christianity, you don't have this declaration. I love that. It's so powerful. Also, we see in this a third point. At the end, it says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Where does government get its power? It's not from itself. It's from the consent of the governed. The governed says, okay, yes, we will entrust with you or entrust to you this power. Basically, we don't want to go around having to, always stand guard at the front of our house and always make sure our rights are protected. No, we are giving you this power. We are entrusting this to you. That's a powerful statement. That flies completely in the face of despotism, communism, right? See, God is king, and under him are people, you and me, not government. No, it's God, then us. This is all explained in this book, by the way, Christianity and Government. It's God, then us, and then we, with the power given us by God as rulers, Genesis 1:26, we put government as our servant. We give them authority to protect our liberty. We hire governments to do that. It's a powerful principle. Powerful principle. All right, so it goes on to say, so far he has established that this isn't tyranny. Well, the king is being tyrannical, but no, we are dissolving this political band. He has broken covenant repeatedly. And later in this, we aren't going to have time for it, but later in this declaration, he talks about how he's tried over and over. The people tried over and over to make peace with the king, and it just wouldn't work. So now they have impeached him, in essence, dissolved that political bond, and rights are given from God, and governments derive their power from the consent of the governed. It goes on to say this, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish, to either change the government or get rid of it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such forms as to them shall most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Okay? So this is the fourth point. It is the right of the people to alter or to abolish wicked governments. It's our right, and the main point we're going to see in a bit is it's not just our right, it's our duty. See, behind rights are duties. There's some Christians that don't they feel entitled to say they have rights. Okay, fine, call it a duty. It's not just that you have the right to overthrow tyrannical government. No, especially for the men, it is your duty as men of God, as Christian men especially, to do this. For instance, we have the right to educate our children. Well, it's because we have the duty. God has given us mandates, and attached with those mandates are God-given rights. So home education, which the state of Texas has done a great job making that free. People have the freedom to educate their children. Why? Because they have the God-given duty to educate their children. So it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish such governments. And obviously we see this in altering, right? We abolished that government 250 years ago. Since then, we've been altering, making changes. Many good, many bad. Now, I love this next paragraph. Listen to this. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. This is a powerful point. This is the fifth point, last point. No government is perfect, and we should often suffer under certain amounts of, be it not injustice necessarily, but let me just quote them. They say, governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. Look, there's no perfect government. So what our founding fathers of this nation, what they didn't want to do is set a precedent in our minds that, anytime we don't like government, we're going to abolish it. No, that's not helpful. I mean, it's the same thing with church government. Church government is not perfect, but you don't just always fire the person. Same thing with family government. Husbands, fathers, we are not perfect, but we work things out. And so we need to be patient. We need to work things out. They tried, and it came to a point where it was obvious this king was a despot. He was a tyrant. Okay, and this brings us to the last paragraph that I'm going to share with you today that really encapsulates, really summarizes. No, I'm sorry, I've got two different paragraphs. And this really summarizes the war for independence. So next July 4th, this is what you can think of. It says, but, so he just got done saying, look, when things are bad, you don't overthrow or you don't dissolve the political band with the government. You need to suffer through it. But, however, when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object and vices a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, listen to this, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. I love that. This is such a powerful document. This is why we went to war. We went to war because of a long train of abuses, usurpations, despotism. It's their right, it's their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. They did this for their grandchildren. They did this for their progeny. Okay, I can't help myself. This is a tangent, but that's what led to the second war for independence, the war between the states, which in my opinion, of all the conflicts of American history, is the one that has been most rewritten, right? The winners kind of get to write the history. So if the British would have won the War of Independence, who knows? History might, you could see the truth if you looked hard, but it might be taught in schools that, yeah, they were just a bunch of rebels over there. And, today, the war between the states, it's typically taught, the Southerners were just a bunch of slaveholders and it was all about slavery. Well, no, less than 10% of people had slaves. And it wasn't about slavery because Lincoln said, you can keep your slaves. I just don't want you to leave the Union. When he did the Emancipation Proclamation, it didn't free any slaves, but it pronounced the freedom of slaves only in rebellious states. Half of Kentucky was a state divided in that period. Half of them were supposedly required to get rid of their slaves, or their slaves were free. The other half, they could keep their slaves. So that is the revisionists have done a great job in that. That was another war for independence, in my personal opinion. All right, here's the last paragraph I'm going to share with you. Such has been the patient suffering of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, and having in direct object establishing an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And he goes through and lists, I think it's like 26, 27 grievances, and then he wraps it up with amazing statements of liberty. But this is what I want you to see. Less than 25% of Americans have read this document. Christians should know this. And I was actually talking to a Christian couple about a week ago, great Christian couple. But the guy said he doesn't like going to church on July 4th because the churches talk about America and he thinks that's not very spiritual. I would push back and say, well, it depends. If it's idolizing, worshiping, or some kind of phony patriotism, okay, yeah, that's kind of lame. But if it's acknowledging that Christ is the King of Kings and that the truths of his word lead to Christian liberty, then it's very appropriate to talk about the theology that led to documents like this. Without Christianity, there is no Declaration of Independence. There is no America as we know it. There is no freedom as we know it. Without Christianity, you have communism, although they still steal from much of our worldview. All right, friends, so I would encourage you, read the Declaration of Independence to your children. We just scratched the surface today. There are so many amazing principles. Once again, I just want to plug, check out our book, Christianity and Government. You can get on Amazon or on our website, jareddodd.com. I can send you some copies, give you a deal. Shoot us an email at doddclan7@gmail.com. Audiobook is coming out on Audible in just a few weeks, probably. But friends, liberty, Christianity rocks. Christianity is awesome. Christianity leads to liberty and freedom and strong nations and strong societies. And obviously, we see what all the isms have done in the last 100 years to this nation. Don't worry, God is raising up a generation of sons and daughters I'm not saying we aren't going to go through hard times, but when the dust settles, we're going to see, I believe, Christian liberty again on the rise. All right, friends, as always, blessings to you guys. Love you very much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.